Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. In the previous video you saw a simple silver bracelet emerged from the shattered remains of the stone Dane had bought at the magic shop. The moment he slipped it onto his arm, the bracelet reacted to his magic, causing mysterious symbols to appear. Sidrain immediately recognized them as the ancient language of the lost magic kingdom Archana. Just as they were taking in this revelation, a sudden deafening sound rang out, startling both Dane and Sidrain. Sidrain, looking worried, hoped it wasn't a warning of a monster attacking, which would be understandable since he was currently in a vulnerable state. But just at that moment, after checking and sensing again, Sidrain realized he could now use his magic without causing harm to his body. Thanks to that, the old man regained his confidence, exclaiming that his body had almost fully recovered and he could finally relax a bit and return the favor. Turning to Dane, feeling eager to break something, he asked what he was still doing and told him to go grab a spear, questioning what that sound was and stating it seemed to be coming from over there. Dane calmly explained that the sound had nothing to do with a monster, but rather meant that his sister was trying to contact him. He said this looking at the pin in front of him, which was emitting a constant ringing sound. Sidrain's enthusiasm deflated immediately, and he remarked that Dane should have said that from the start, adding that there was no way a monster would appear in this area. Dane awkwardly responded that if they didn't mind, he would talk to his sister for a moment and then quickly contacted Arabella. Arabella seemed a little annoyed after waiting so long for him to answer, asking why it had taken him so long to pick up. Dane apologized and asked if she needed something. Hearing this, Arabella got straight to the point, stating that while she was analyzing his magical code, she paused as if sensing something and asked if there was someone with him. Dane, almost anticipating her question, asked if she had figured out that his magic was ancient magic too. Arabella exclaimed in surprise, asking how he knew. After explaining everything, Arabella finally understood the situation, realizing that when Dane and Lord Sidrain were analyzing the stone, they had figured out it came from the ancient magical kingdom and that it only reacted to his magic, to which Dane confirmed. Meanwhile, Sidrain, upon hearing that Arabella had also realized Dane's magic was ancient magic, gritted his teeth in surprise. He thought to himself that the girl had figured that out just by analyzing the boy's magic, acknowledging that she was a genius and even more talented than he had imagined. Turning to Arabella, who had clarified everything, she asked anxiously if anyone else knew about this. Dane replied no. Arabella then instructed Dane to listen carefully to what she was saying and also asked Lord Sidrain to listen. She warned them that they had better keep this secret, as revealing it now would have consequences they wouldn't be able to handle. At the mention of Sidrain's name, the old man cleared his throat a few times. He greeted Lady Arabella, mentioning that he had heard quite a bit about her from Dane. Arabella apologized for jumping straight into the topic without introducing herself. Sidrain reassured her not to worry, stating that he would keep this secret because if it got out now, not just Dane but the entire Sogres family would be in big trouble. Arabella responded happily, acknowledging that as expected of him, he immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Sidrain then asked if the conversation was being recorded. Arabella replied that no, once the conversation ended it would automatically disappear. Sidrain said good, stating that no one wanted evidence lying around, and added that he planned to return to the magic tower to investigate this matter. Arabella thanked Lord Sidrain for his help. Sidrain waved off her thanks, saying that he was doing this out of the responsibility of a magician and it was nothing. Then, as if remembering something, he asked while they were talking he had heard she was looking for a magic tower to join and inquired if she had decided which one to join yet. Upon hearing this, Arabella understood the implication in Sidrain's question. She replied not yet, adding that she wasn't considering the Nixian magic tower as it wasn't specialized in the field she was interested in. She hesitated before continuing. Sidrain thought to himself that he wondered where that boy got his decisiveness from, as it seemed to be from his older sister. However, very quickly Sidrain's focus shifted back and Arabella's refusal didn't disappoint him too much. He chuckled, saying he understood, and added that she didn't have to come from their tower. In response, Arabella offered some reassurance, stating that she was sure there were other talented individuals out there who would join his magic tower anyway. Dane then said okay to his sister, acknowledging that they would discuss the details later, and told her to take care before quickly disconnecting the device. After seeing the end of their conversation, the old man nodded and remarked that Dane's sister had become quite skilled. Hearing this, Dane felt a bit proud, stating that of course she was the one who created this, and she had told him that this crystal ball was the trend among young magicians these days. Looking at the communication device in Dane's hand, Sidrain shook his head slightly, acknowledging that it was indeed quite impressive, but he didn't need a device like that. He explained that once one reached level 8, communicating with others wasn't really a priority, and if something important needed to be said, they could come meet him directly, asking if that wasn't right, to which Dane agreed. Dane went to tell his parents about the ancient magic he possessed. Arkan's voice sounded slightly worried as he repeated ancient magic, stating that it made him a little concerned. Arkan spoke firmly, and next to them Lady Lily added that sounded good and she would make sure anyone who targeted him would fall silent in her own way. Watching his parents getting so protective, Dane began to sweat for anyone who might try to harm him, thinking to himself that they were full of killing intent, but with these two protecting him, he had nothing to fear. Then Arkan started stroking his chin and said that if that was the case then that meant there was ancient magic hidden in their bloodline. Hearing the speculation from his father, Lady Lily nodded and said that was a good question. She admitted they didn't know if any of their ancestors had it, but she would check with her side of the family. With both parents considering this, Dane felt a bit curious inside, wondering if both sides of the family investigated would they find something. It wasn't extremely important, but he was still intrigued. Setting the ancient magic topic aside, Lady Lily turned her thoughtful gaze to her son and said that it seemed like he had already reached a few limits. She suggested that if he stayed here it would hold back his development and he should consider moving to the capital now. Hearing this, Dane's face became a bit confused as he repeated, "The capital?" Arkan nodded in agreement, explaining that he knew at least one had to be 14 years old to enroll in the academy, and now Dane was old enough. He admitted that he had actually wanted to keep him there for another year or two before sending him off, but it seemed there was nothing more for him to learn there. Turning to Lady Lily, who could sense Dane's worry, she gently held his hand and advised him that if he chose this path he could leave anytime he wanted. Dane was a bit surprised by this response and thought he hadn't expected them to think this way. Arkan said with a smile that Dane would do great and should go and fulfill his potential the way he wanted. Encouraged by his parents' words, Dane no longer hesitated and said that he understood what they both meant and would prepare to go to the academy. Arkan nodded approvingly, stating that was good, and added that it was time for him to level up too. Dane smiled inwardly, thinking that he guessed it was time for a new chapter, feeling a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. Time quickly passed, and at this moment Dane also shared his plans with Sidrain. Sidrain asked again if this was his choice. Dane replied yes, but a little sooner than he had expected, with a sigh. Sidrain stated that he had made a very good choice, and staying there any longer would only limit his potential, which would be a waste. Sidrain continued, offering a piece of advice not to immediately reveal too much about his talents, explaining that even though the academy was a place that welcomed talent, not everyone thought that way. The old wizard said this seriously, and with his 2 lifetimes of experience, Dane understood part of it. He agreed, mentioning that Arabella had also told him about this and she had to face people insulting her. Sidrain nodded, adding that normal kids wouldn't keep up, but the Duke Thermion and family was a different story. This made Dane recall Layla, and he remembered that he had told her he would visit her if he went to the capital, and if he didn't she would be very disappointed. Dane pondered the seal Duke Thermion had given him, wondering what kind of weapon he should forge with it. He then drifted into his own thoughts, a swirl of ideas that even he couldn't quite grasp. Across from him, the old man stroked his beard thoughtfully before speaking, musing if it would be another 3 months before Dane joined the academy. He suggested that Dane should leave their current dwelling in 2 months. Upon hearing this, Dane nodded, finding the suggestion reasonable. He then inquired about the old man's own plans. In response, the old man shared that he intended to return to the magic tower, feeling a renewed sense of purpose thanks to Dane. He promised to inform Dane of any discoveries related to ancient magic. Dane expressed his sincere gratitude for this offer. The conversation then shifted to Dane's lessons. Considering the limited time, the old man emphasized the need to accelerate his studies, noting the significant difference in difficulty between level 2 and level 3. Dane assured him that he would study diligently. He reached into his spatial ring and retrieved a small wooden box, placing it in front of Sidrain. He explained that his sister had sent it via teleportation magic, mentioning it was a newly released item. Both of their gazes fell upon the box, which contained a small piece of stone. Dane explained that it was a new compact crystal ball not yet available on the market. He added that Arabella, knowing he wanted one, had sent it to him. On the other side, the old man Sidrain seemed utterly captivated by the new gadget. He quickly picked up the stone, his eyes lighting up as he exclaimed its compact and beautiful design. Though he claimed he didn't actually need it, he graciously accepted the gift. He then excitedly realized he could record with his magic on it. Dane confirmed this and encouraged him to use it to contact him. Despite his earlier claim of not needing it, Sidrain looked quite thrilled. Dane couldn't help but think he might end up teaching the old man how to use modern devices. Sidrain then cheerfully demonstrated how to use it, making Dane feel a little apprehensive, hoping he wouldn't be contacted too frequently. Time passed quickly, and as evening approached, Dane found himself deep in thought about the future because the academy loomed in his mind, and he knew he needed to prepare seriously in the next 2 months since his primary interest lay in reaching a certain level in summoning magic. He set his goal to officially enroll in the summoning class, receive the summoning mark, and earn the chance to take the ability assessment exam. He continued his train of thought, realizing that since Claire was an assistant professor, he would likely encounter her often once he enrolled. Dane then turned his gaze to the egg resting in the display case beside him, murmuring that he had forgotten to infuse his old friend with magic. Without hesitation, Dane began channeling his mana into the egg, a ritual he had performed countless times, and as he did so he reflected on the past 7 years during which he had infused magic into it day and night, yet it remained stubbornly unreactive. However, he held onto the hope that if the magic hadn't dissipated and the egg had indeed absorbed the energy, it would undoubtedly hatch one day. Time continued its swift passage and the scene shifted to Arabella, who was explaining the Academy's exams to Dane because she mentioned that there was a general exam and a specialized exam. On the other end of the communication, Dane listened intently, beginning to grasp the information, but he was still harboring some questions, so he asked for more details. Arabella paused for a moment before elaborating, and she explained that the general exam was a preliminary test designed to classify candidates covering culture, history, and matters related to the Althian Empire. She assured Dane that this wouldn't be a problem for him, emphasizing that a better performance would be more beneficial as it factored into the entrance exam score. After a brief pause, she moved on to the specialized exam, explaining that it required choosing a major and taking an exam on that subject, and while the content depended on the professor, Arabella expressed complete confidence in Dane's ability to pass, especially since he had a letter of recommendation. Dane acknowledged his understanding, and then he asked if they had both passed it easily. Arabella confirmed that they had, shrugging and saying it wasn't difficult at all, but she reminded her younger brother that once he chose his major for the specialized exam, he would have to stick with it unless he wanted to switch later on. Dane understood, and then he chuckled awkwardly, remarking that she still hadn't given up on this, so he paused before asking if switching majors after enrolling would require changing departments entirely. Arabella replied that it usually did unless one graduated and wanted to start over, and she added that while attending other major classes was possible, advanced courses from the third year onwards were typically restricted to students in the relevant majors. Absorbing this information, Dane fell into a moment of contemplation before stating that he would have to choose just one major to study. On the other end, Arabella seemed to recall something, and she quickly reminded him about a program called the elective major, specifically designed for talented individuals like him. Dane exclaimed that it sounded interesting, but Arabella cautioned him that it wasn't as easy as it sounded, reminding him that if he didn't intend to purposely fail, he probably wouldn't find anyone wanting to sign up for it. Dane asked curiously why that was, and Arabella replied that up until now no one had ever passed that exam. Arabella paused for a moment before anxiously asking if he was considering testing himself with that, but Dane quickly denied it, saying his sister Sir Sidraine was there and he would contact her later, immediately ending the communication. At this point, Arabella felt a pang of regret, wondering if she had pushed him too hard, but then reassured herself that magic was still better. Meanwhile, a female voice echoed from ahead, calling for Senior Arabella, informing her that the professor was looking for her, so Arabella replied that she was coming right now and left. Back with Sir Sidraine that afternoon, the old man delivered the promised letter of recommendation to Dane, and he presented it, stating that it was the letter he had promised. Dane quickly took it and asked if Sidraine had truly written it for him, so Sidraine adjusted his beard, puffed out his chest, and replied that not only the form but also the content was his own work. He mentioned having written several letters of recommendation, but this was the first time he had put so much effort into one, suggesting Dane consider it an honor. Despite his somewhat arrogant demeanor, it was clear that Sidraine had put significant thought into the letter, and Dane felt a deep sense of gratitude, vowing not to disappoint him. Looking at Dane, Sidraine suddenly sighed, remarking that if Dane wanted to be his student, he would have known better, but he added that even if he had accepted Dane as a student, he didn't think Dane would immediately call him teacher. His words struck a chord with Dane, causing him to momentarily stop breathing, and he thought with a bit of awkwardness how Sidraine knew. Changing the subject, Sidraine then asked if Dane had prepared for his trip, and Dane replied that he didn't have many things to bring, for the academy dormitory was already well equipped, providing most of the necessary items. Upon hearing this, Sidraine clicked his tongue and shook his head because he acknowledged that the facilities were good, but they were monopolized by a few individuals. However, he added that Dane wasn't the type to let those people walk all over him, so Dane chuckled inwardly, thinking that the academy seemed to be a gathering place for some unpleasant nobles. As soon as Sidraine noticed Dane's expression, he quickly guessed what was on his mind, and he reminded him not to forget that the place might be harsh, because he warned that if Dane showed disrespect, many people would immediately reveal their true nature and show their claws. Hearing this reminder, Dane immediately corrected his attitude, thinking that it was probably no different from a battlefield, so he nodded affirmatively, indicating his understanding. Seeing this, Sidraine gave him a final piece of advice, telling him to feel free to contact him if he needed anything, and also mentioning that the crystal ball, or crystal orb as Dane called it, was really useful and he would make good use of it. Feeling as if they were parting ways, Dane asked why Sidraine was talking as if he were leaving. Upon hearing this, Sidraine's eyes flashed with surprise, asking if Dane had noticed, and he confirmed his plan to leave the next day. Dane expressed his regret, but Sidraine replied that he couldn't stay there forever because he mentioned that Dane's father had offered him the position of magic advisor, but he would think about that later when he had time, as he still had a lot of work to finish. He patted Dane's shoulder as he said this, prompting Dane to think about the ancient magic Sidraine had mentioned earlier, wondering if helping Dane with it was like helping himself, and he thought it wasn't a bad idea at all. With that, the old wizard turned and walked away, feeling a bit sad perhaps because of the time they had spent together, and he couldn't help but feel a little down as Sidraine left. Time passed quickly and one day Arkan and Lily were talking to each other, so Arkan asked if Sidrain had left safely. Lily replied that Dane had said he would set off that day and confirmed that he was ready. Her expression still held a hint of concern, for she mentioned hearing that he would leave early, which made her feel a little more at ease, but she still wondered if he would run into any trouble on the way. Lily was a bit anxious knowing it was Dane's first time venturing into the wider world. Arkan noticed her worry, so he patted her shoulder and reassured her that they would be using the teleportation gate that Arabella had set up, so there was nothing to worry about. Lily's expression softened and she sighed in relief, admitting she had been worrying for nothing. Meanwhile, Arkan, thinking about the love and care they had given Dane, smiled contentedly. He remarked that they had raised their children very well, especially compared to other families busy squabbling over the position of family head while their children had a clear direction. He added that one day they would have to make a decision, but he wouldn't show favoritism. At that moment the door to the room opened and Dane entered, now fully prepared for his departure. He greeted them as he stepped inside. Seeing him, both Arkan and Lily nodded in acknowledgement. Lily immediately asked if he had arrived and was leaving now, inquiring if he had packed the sign she had given him and the black emblem. Dane smiled, assuring her that he had everything with him. Lily, still a little worried, gave him one last reminder to go to the place she had told him about and show them the emblem if he encountered any difficult situations. Dane assured her that he remembered. Then he asked curiously if those people were her old colleagues. Lily replied with a warm smile that they were very close friends of hers, and although it had been a long time since they had met, she was sure they would help him if he needed anything. At the same time, Arkan, who had been listening quietly, began to sweat a little, wondering if their Dane was going to start down the path of an assassin. To prevent this, Arkan quickly advised Dane to find Duke Thermion before heading to the academy once he got to the capital, assuring him that the Duke would help. Dane replied, "Yes, father." Just before their separation, Lady Lily couldn't hold back her tears, remarking that Dane had grown up so much and was about to leave. Seeing his wife in such a state, Arkan could only force a smile, chuckling awkwardly and suggesting they send him off with a smile. Lily gently agreed, wiping her tears as she did so. Dane, feeling a tightness in his chest, suddenly felt the weight of the moment, his legs feeling heavier as if the reality of leaving had begun to sink in. "Then I'll take my leave," Dane said, managing a half-hearted smile. With that, he turned to leave, and Arkan, watching his son from the window, grew somber. "Gil, lad," Arkan called out coldly, instructing him to follow Dane closely, ensure he reached the teleportation gate safely and report back. Gil, lad, responded with an emotionless "yes, master," and turned to leave to carry out the task of ensuring the young master's safety. Lady Lily, seeing the preparations made by her husband, sighed with resignation and spoke softly, noting it had been a long time since they had such shadows. She then instructed someone to keep an eye on Dane's teleportation and make sure there were no abnormalities. Meanwhile, at the location of the teleportation gate, Dane noticed something strange, for the gate wasn't set up inside the family estate, but in an open field. As the butler Herman gazed at the teleportation gate, his eyes widened in awe, and he exclaimed to the young master how truly impressive it was to see something like this in person. Dane replied with a smile, explaining that it was the teleportation gate his eldest sister had prepared. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.